Hi, good morning, everyone. I will be talking today about something that none of you has experienced. It's a new event, an infectious disease, a pandemic, actually. You might have heard about it. And this is how it usually starts. When you are trying to support decision-making in such an event, there's a huge sense that you're in the middle of fog of war. And when we just started, it was, for a lot of people, there was a sense that, this is a temporary situation. Soon, all of the fog will go away, and clarity will come in. Science will come in prevailing. We'll know everything that needs to know. There's such great scientific groups around the world. They would give us all the information we need, and we will make data-driven decisions throughout this crisis, starting maybe 1 month, 2 months into the event. That was not the case. That did not happen. And what I will try to do is to point today to some examples in which we have been able to inject some clarity and some data-driven and science-driven inferences into the decision-making process. And in this, I will go sequentially in a chronological way through the waves of infection here in Israel. And I will try to touch upon some different challenges that we had to cope with different level of depth. I will start by an example in which we had to do, let's say, advanced modeling with no data, which was an interesting challenge. Then an event in which we had to really make some clarity in disarray data. A point in time where there was a lot of bias and a lot of confounding we had to deal with. Then an example where we had to get big inferences from small data. And finally, a very recent one where we had to deal with some unavailable data in order to tackle the problem at hand. So I will begin. We'll start with the example of no data, which really is interesting. Clalit, and I think most of you know this, has had for the last over a decade an approach of predictive proactive prevention. We had a narrative in which we were trying to identify diseases that will be manifested in the future. We wanted to use predictive modeling in order to find exacerbations and illnesses that will happen and to guide our patients the right way. And we have been implementing this. This is not a theoretical construct. We've been using predictive modeling in practice to hundreds of thousands of people throughout Israel for over a decade now, in practice with measured outcomes. But the challenge when I'm talking about February 2020 was that we really wanted to once again identify the patients at risk for severe COVID-19. We really wanted to find them. The only problem was there was no single case in Israel yet. So what do you do with your data when you don't have data on the right patients? And I will also mention that in every one of these instances I'm talking about, time was in the essence. So we really had to do something really quickly. There was a sense of impending catastrophe, and we wanted to provide our patients with some protection as early as we can before the disease reaches Israel. So what we've done, the first was a two-stage hybrid process in which we started with something that we do on a daily basis, basically. We wanted to create a predictor of severe respiratory illness, winter morbidity that drives patients into a hospital with severe illness, because we thought there would be a joint mechanism to all respiratory diseases, including this new one, which we know nothing about, that we can build upon. So the process was take what we call in the Clalit Research Institute the PAN predictor. It's basically the internal machinery that allows us to process most of the data that we have in our data warehouse very quickly to create predictive modeling. What used to take us in the past months now takes hours. Very clever whole set of processes done by the wonderful scientists at the Clalit Research Institute. And we've done just that. And we took all of the features that we found that would be most relevant, and we then re-ranked them using MD know-how to find those that had pathophysiological sense in them. So there was a lot of prior knowledge injected into the process, and we chose these ones that made the most sense. And we also added in some that we knew from the emerging literature that were important. And after we had this basic predictive model, which was performing very well, there was still a problem because it predicted winter mortality, with a lot of mortality, for instance, in the younger age groups, which by data from China at that point was not relevant for COVID-19. At which point, a second step came into the process. And this one was really a smart trick based on the work of Guy Rothblum here and other scientists that have had created what is called the multi-calibration process. It is a post-processing trick in which you nudge the predictors for every single patient after you had your predictor and after you had the analysis, and you nudge them a little bit so they will fit a predefined distribution between different subgroups. It was originally made for completely different purposes to deal with the issue of fairness and to allow a good representation of the outcomes in small minority subgroups. So what we've done, thanks to our collaborators and thanks to the help of the scientists, both Guy with Machon Weizmann, as well as Uri Shalit sitting here from the Technion, and a set of the great scientists at the Clalit Research Institute, we've created a COVID-19 predictor. And immediately afterwards, without waiting for any confirmation, we started calling those people. Those 200,000 people that had the highest risk according to this predictive model. And indeed, very quickly, 200,000 people got their calls and 300 additional people got their SMSs. And we told them, if you need medical care, stay at home, we'll come there, or we'll send a team over, or we'll do telemedicine. When the patients felt ill, we made sure they will go to a hospital and not get community care because we thought these are the guys who are going to deteriorate on us. So we want to be really quick and really assertive about them. And we have. And so this was an amazing work by the community division of Clalit, in which the physicians and the nurses called each one of these patients. In hindsight, later, we were able to publish. So you can see here, this is basically the paper, you can look it up. PI, Noam Barda from the Clalit Research Institute and Noah Dagan. And what we found out in hindsight was it was exceedingly effective. Within 7% of the population, we've been able to catch 70% of those who will actually have this deterioration. So it was more than decent, and it was far, far beyond what we could get from age-driven data. Later on, we also created a national, so this will fit not only for Clalit patients, we created a national, very simple point system that was put on all the papers and shown on TV, and people knew how to protect themselves if they were at risk. So this was another separate process, which I don't have time to talk about today. So this is an example of how we do predictive preventive modeling with no data. Now, on the second wave, we have a different challenge. The challenge at that time was we had so many suspected patients and we didn't have enough tests, and we wanted to know where to allocate our scarce tests. And at that point in time, we wanted to predict who's going to have tomorrow COVID-19, which is a pretty straightforward thing to ask. The problem is we wanted to use data not just from our data warehouse, but from a variety of sources that we've had, very different types of sources, even from a symptom survey that we created with the help of Kira Radinsky, who's here, and Eran Segal, and others. And so we wanted to collate all this data in order to predict who are the patients who have tomorrow COVID-19, and then they are not aware of that. And we've been able to create a pretty decent model, I think. You can see here on the top, we could have a positive predictive value over 40%. So, it was pretty good pinpointing. And when this patient came into the physician's office, this is what he had. He had this alert come up. And this happened until a few weeks ago when we turned it off, when people started complaining, that, this patient came in for a back pain. He basically could have COVID-19. Why don't you ask him if he has a problem smelling or tasting? I know that he didn't come for that, but maybe you should ask him. We also created heat maps and allocated our testing facilities to the places that will be lighted up tomorrow, not today. So this is a predictive approach to the logistic question of where do you allocate your tests. The third example I will touch upon, maybe with a little bit more depth, is that of heavily biased data. And this is a problem which I think most of you are aware of. But I want to depict to you the point in time we really had to make tough decisions. So some of you remember we started vaccinating on mid-December. And a little bit before that, we started seeing the great inclination of the third wave of COVID-19. And we went into lockdown in the beginning of January. And on February 7th, we were 4 weeks into a lockdown. The public was so weary and so angry, he really wanted out. And this is what our morbidity graph looks like. So if I'll ask each of any one of you who needs to advise the government, and they listen. What would you tell them? To open the lockdown or not at this point? It doesn't look good. You'll agree. It doesn't look good. The intuitive thing to say is, are you nuts? This is not going the right direction. But we had some data that would tell us what's about to happen. And we knew we had two forces working in parallel. One is a new variant. Sounds familiar? A new variant coming in that is supposed to be more infective, 50% more infective, again, very similar. And we have the vaccines that are working in parallel. The vaccines had only started, so we don't have the full effect. But we need to know what should we expect in terms of the effect of the vaccination in order to make those decisions. So how do we know how effective are the vaccines? Well, there's a clinical trial. There's a wonderful clinical trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine, Pollack et al., and they've had really, really clear results, 95% of efficacy, which is good. It's really good. So we can trust the vaccines, or could we? Because clinical trials are done in perfect settings, with perfect cold chain, with selected participants, with few representation of older subgroups, of multimorbidity. That's not our patients. So will I trust this and do those decision-making based on this, or do I need some ground level, local data and inferences in order to make the decision? It's obvious I need effectiveness data, not efficacy data, to take that decision. It's too risky. The problem is that if I go to the Clalit data set and I will start looking at some of the baseline data, I can't compare vaccinated and unvaccinated in a naive way. That sounds really, really fantastic. It's just exceedingly wrong, because the vaccinated and unvaccinated are exceedingly different. For instance, if I take people coming from low socioeconomic class neighborhoods, they would have high vaccination rates, and they would have low SES, would have low vaccination rates and high infection rate. So even if the vaccine is pure water, I will have an amazing effect. So I can't do naive comparisons, okay? And it's really difficult. So how do you approach this? The one approach is you want to do something that would look really like a clinical trial in hindsight, what is called a target trial. So you want to match the cohorts. First thing you do, the intuitive thing to do is to start, looking at the list of people who got vaccinated until now, those who didn't get vaccinated, and do matching. We'll do wonderful matching, a lot of variables. So all of these matches are wonderful. There's one problem with them. Some of them got vaccinated later, some of them got vaccinated earlier, and that's not good, because this time difference has a huge impact and introduces a lot of bias. This is not the retrospective approach by knowing who will be vaccinated in the future is not how a clinical trial actually works. So you can't emulate a clinical trial when you do this retrospective approach. You have to go prospectively. And so imagine all the time, imagine your target trial, so as defined by Miguel Hernan and others, and you need to do this day by day. Every day you need to find the vaccinated, and you need to match him with unvaccinated that day. And everybody should have an ability to be there. And you keep on following them until the unvaccinated goes vaccinated. What do you do then? So there's a big question, what do you do then? And so the answer to that is what we have chosen to do in this rolling cohort approach is to decouple and to censor basically the old control, and then go into a new couple that starts at that day with this newly vaccinated person getting his own match for that day. And so this is much less simple algorithmically as compared to the naive approach, but it's so much more precise in terms of the biases that are introduced. And so this is just one example of some of the methodological difficulties we had to tackle in this process, and we could talk about a lot of them. There's a list of some of them you can think about: changing in time, informative censoring, and how you deal with all of those. Eventually, we had our real-world study. We had 600,000 vaccinees compared with 600,000 perfectly matched individuals. Just so you understand, for a 56-year-old male ultra-Orthodox coming from a neighborhood in Tel Aviv with 3 chronic diseases and 2 years of consecutive flu vaccination, we matched on that same day a 56-year-old male ultra-Orthodox from the same neighborhood in Tel Aviv with 3 chronic diseases and 2 years of consecutive flu vaccination. And all of this in a rolling cohort approach, and all of that taken into account. And the team that did all these miracles are written here. First of all, Noah Dagan and Noam Barda were the leads. Eldad, Oren, Shai, and Mark written here. And then the wonderful team from Harvard, Miguel Hernan, Mark Lipsitz, and Ben Rice, exceedingly helpful. And we got this, and this did quite a splash, definitely. And one of the most, I think, interesting things is we said, but there's a lot of residual confounding that probably we didn't identify yet, so what do? So we had a very useful trick in this case, and it's hidden here in the Kaplan-Meier curves. In those first 10 days, you're not supposed to have an effect in those 10 days. So you have what is called the negative control outcome, which is the most elegant way of assessing your residual confounding. And what we did this in two-stage process. In the beginning, we did everything that needed to be done to get the groups similar with all of the matching processes that needed to be done until they reached what you see here on the right. And only then we went onwards to assess our outcomes. So the outcomes were not bad. 95% and 92% for clinical illness. In a further publication in the same journal, about a month later, we published more updated results with 96 and 95% protection. This is a wonderful, wonderful vaccine. The two last examples, and I will be brief. One was of very small data. A new variant comes to the neighborhood. There's just a few cases. How do you know if it's evading the vaccine or not? You can't do the huge 600,000 thing that I've just shown you. So how can you get a hint about whether it's working or not? And this is work that was done with our friends at the Tel Aviv University. Adiz Stern Lab has led this, and you can see all of the different people also from the Clalit Institute as well as others listed here. Shai Ben Shachar and Adiz Stern were the leads on this, as well as people from the community division of Clalit. And you can see the outcome. We were able to basically show that the people with that specific variant were overrepresented in the breakthrough cases, 8-fold, in the first week after vaccination, which means this probably variant has an immune evasion modality that allows us to evade some of the vaccine protective effect. Finally, the last point, unavailable data. Some of you might be interested in the question whether they should or should not vaccinate their youngsters, the teenagers. And this was something that bugged us quite a lot. But the problem is we didn't have the right data to be able to do this. So at this point, with unavailable data, what we did was a group with the cardiologists at Balicer, Guy Wittberg and Ran Kornowski, were leading this and are still leading this. And we were able to show, this will be published in the coming few days, that indeed the rates of myocarditis are lower than were until now shown. Not only that, they were majority of them were exceedingly mild, self-limiting, and leaving no sequelae afterwards. With this, I finalize. So now we know everything that we need to know, right, about this virus and about this disease. And here comes Delta. And we start all over again. About 2 months ago, we published in Science a editorial that said, don't yell goal before the ball is in. Don't be so quick to judge that you're out of the woods. And here comes Delta. And what it feels like right now is a little bit like this again. So with this, I'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Could you just put the slide again? It's an important slide.
No questions? Nobody want to know if there is?
Yeah, just to thank again the wonderful group of amazing scientists at the Clalit Research Institute. And as always, we're looking for the best talents. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.